You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mott,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Wendy Holden on the show with me today. She has a phenomenal new book. It's called The Royal Governess, a novel of Queen Elizabeth II's childhood. This is such a fun book. Welcome to the show, Wendy.
Thank you, Hank. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. It was really, really fun to write. Really interesting book to write. I loved it.
I can only imagine. Wendy, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
I didn't think I could be a writer for quite a long time, but there was a book I read as a child that sort of lit the flame that made me think it would be a wonderful thing to do, even though I didn't think I'd ever be able to do it. You know that the British writer Enid Blyton, have you heard of her, the children's writer?
Yeah, absolutely.
She wrote a autobiography called My Life. And she in it, she described the writer's life. And she said that writing was really easy. And all she did was sit in the swing chair in her garden, and she would shut her eyes, and all the characters in her books would just appear behind her eyelids. And it was like looking at a film. And all she had to do was write down everything they did and said, and that just made the books. And then they obviously sold bazillions, and she just did really well. And I just thought, wow, that sounds great. What a great way to live. And the book was absolutely full of wonderful photographs of her fabulous house and wonderful children and amazing husband and just general splendor of the writer's life. So I got the impression quite early on that being a writer was really amazing. And it was only when I started to do it myself that I realized that Enid was not telling the truth about writing. It's not the case of shutting your eyes and it all happens. It's anything but that. So I think Enid was probably being a bit economical with the truth. Anyway, but yeah, that was a very early memory of the glamour and splendor of the writer's existence.
That is so funny. I've heard these great stories from people, Wendy, that that said that they would walk through a bookstore or a library, and it would seem like these books were, almost ethereal, like they just came out of the mist or something like that. And then there was a realization that came to them that these were created by people.
Yes,
and then
absolutely.
Once you attach these to people, then it's not a far stretch of the imagination to say that this was made by people like me, and
Absolutely.
and the craft becomes accessible at that point. Did you have any kind of a experience like that where the recollection or the knowing came upon you that this is something that I could do, even little old me?
Yeah, I mean, I was at the time this happened, I was working as a journalist on the Sunday Times in London, and I had a job which was to I had loads of jobs in the role. I was the deputy editor of one of the sections, and one of my jobs was to look after the major columnists. And a new columnist joined. It was this kind of a sort of aristocratic party girl, and the idea was that she was going to write her column, and I was just going to edit it. But to cut a long story short, she couldn't write, and I ended up writing it for her. And I wrote it every week, 600 words a week, for 2.5 years. And in that space of time, it became an enormously successful column and became really famous. And so that was kind of the beginning of my of my experience as a writer, because it was like writing a serial novel, except that every week I would write. And so it wasn't a big stretch from there to think, oh, I could write a book now. I could do this. And in fact, my first novel, which was called Simply Divine and came out about 20 years ago, was a comic novel, but it was about a columnist who writes the column for a party girl who can't do it herself. So that was really, it was sort of real life experience, sort of making me think I can do this, because I got such confidence from the way the column went down and how popular it was. So it was, it was quite, so from then on, the book came out and I was off.
So you talked about the time that you spent in the newspaper business. How do you feel like that was a plank in the bridge, if you want to put it that way, to get you to where you are now? Do you feel like that time shaped you as a writer?
Definitely, because being on a newspaper is as you may well know is quite tough, and people are quite merciless with because there's not a lot of time. It's got to be the right thing, and you had to learn. I had to learn to edit very quickly. I had to learn to write very quickly, and develop a sort of tough skin and all that sort of thing. And all those things have come in very, very handy ever since. So it definitely did. But also the work ethic, having to produce it. If you've got a deadline, if you've got a book deadline, whether it's an article deadline or a book deadline, you do it. You produce the goods. You do what you've been asked to do. So absolutely, I think it was fundamental to my life as a writer. Really, it sort of set me up in the right way.
Wendy, looking over your back catalog, you have published a number of titles. Do you remember that first novel that you wrote that was the launching pad for your fiction writing career? And do you remember the circumstances around that first book?
Yes, I mean, very well. I remember everything about it because it came out of this column, as I was saying, and it became, because the column was very famous, the book, when it came out, my novel, became a hit immediately, and I was amazed because I didn't expect that at all. I mean, it was a kind of a dream, and the whole thing sort of just set off at a cracking pace. So yeah, I mean, I remember everything about it. It was a really dramatic switch of careers, because up until that moment I was kind of jobbing journalist and working very long hours and didn't particularly expect anything more than that to happen to me, and then suddenly this completely different direction opened up, and it's the path I've traveled ever since.
I love that. You have not only have you written fiction, but you've written quite a number of high-profile biographies.
Hank.
Yes.
Can I stop you there?
Yes.
Can I stop you there, Hank? That's not me. There are two Wendy Holdens, and the other Wendy Holden does all the Auschwitz type stuff. That's not me.
I'm so sorry. I'm so
it's
sorry.
It's okay. Why would you know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. No, absolutely no. I haven't done any of the Goldie Hawns or the dog biography or any of that stuff. No, I'm just the comic novels and the historical novels.
Great. Well, let's switch gears then. I'll edit that out. So you have written quite a few historical novels, and I love talking to historical novelists and getting the kind of the look behind the curtain, because there's something intriguing about these types of books that not only give us a glimpse into real life people and real life happenings, but that also people that can take liberty with filling in the cracks, filling in the places that we don't know about. How do you approach like your current book? We're talking about Queen Elizabeth's early years. How do you approach a topic that there's so much published about, but then look for those areas where you can add your artistic flair to?
Well, the great thing about the Royal Governess is that it's based on a book and a point of view which has never really been explored before. I mean, it's the story of Queen Elizabeth's childhood, as you said, but the heroine of the Royal Governess is this woman called Marion Crawford. And she taught the Queen and her sister for 17 years, from when they were little girls until they were grown up. And she was with the royal family, and the girls in particular, through 17 of probably the most amazing years in the 20th century, if not any century. She was with them through the abdication of Edward VIII, through the coronation of their parents, George VI and Queen Elizabeth. And the whole of World War II. And she saw these massive historical events, not just from the point of view of the British royal family, but in particular from the point of view of the little girls right at the centre of the action. And so it's a very familiar set of events in that particular part of the book, seen from a completely new point of view. But there's a lot more to the story than that. I mean, that's the kind of middle section. But what drew me to Marion Crawford's story in the first place is the fact that she never wanted to work for royalty at all. She tells us on the first page of her autobiography, on which I've based The Royal Governess, this book called The Little Princesses. She tells us on the very first page that she never wanted to work for royalty, that she wanted to work with poor children in the slums of Edinburgh, in the housing projects in Edinburgh, really, really poor places. She wanted to help close the gap between the haves and the have-nots in society. And so when I read that, I thought, how did this sort of young student, this sort of woke young woman who wasn't interested in aristocrats, how did she go from there to spending 17 years with the royal family? So that was the trajectory I followed. And it was an amazing story because she didn't mean to, as I say, she didn't want to. And it only happened because she and Princess Elizabeth got on so well. They became very, very close. And also, even though she'd left the slums behind her, she'd left the poor children, she wasn't going to be teaching them, but she took all her ideas about social justice and about equality to the palace with her. And she wanted to show the princesses how ordinary people lived, how normal people lived, how people who weren't as privileged as them lived. And so she took them out to the Tube, she took them shopping at Woolworths, she took them swimming, and she even started a Buckingham Palace Girl Guide pack. So she tried to give them as much normality as she possibly could, and that was completely in line with her views about how they were living a sort of almost dangerously remote existence from ordinary people. So that was a really interesting part of her story, and it was really fun to fictionalize in The Royal Governess. And then I moved on to the middle section, which was all these amazing historical events. And right at the end, the story takes another twist, because having come to the end of 17 years of royal service, she left, and she wrote a very harmless memoir that was really, really nice about the royal family. It was really very loving, very respectful, but they were absolutely furious, and they saw it as a major betrayal, and they just cast her into the outer darkness and never spoke to her again. And wow. She spent the last 40 years of her life ostracized, alienated and ignored by this family for who she'd more or less given up, her personal life, her chances of having children, or being married to anybody, worth marrying, really. She just gave up her life, really, and they just threw her away. And it was such a sad story. So the whole story is there are so many different aspects to it, and each aspect is really dramatic. So, and as I say, it had been buried, for 70 years. I mean, no one had seen this story since 1950, because The Little Princesses, her book, was completely whitewashed from history. After its first publication, when it became very successful, it just faded into nothing. And by the time I found it, it was out of print and no one had ever heard of it. So I just thought, this is an incredible story, and I wanted to turn it into a novel on the spot.
So how did you discover the story of Marion Crawford? Because you said that you stumbled on this book that was out of print. Did you have any recollection? Did you know about her at all?
No, not really. I'd heard her name and vaguely knew that she existed. I mean, she's just sort of knocking around in the background, but I didn't know much about her. I found it in a secondhand bookshop. I was just browsing in a secondhand bookshop in the north of England, in Northumberland, which is in the north. Very sort of big old-fashioned bookshop. It just literally fell out of the shelf, and I just thought it was fate. The minute I picked it up, I thought I was meant to find this. This is the book. This is the book I want to use as a basis for my novel, for The Royal Governess. And that was it. It was just pure chance. It just came literally tumbling out of the bookshelf, and as soon as I picked it up and started to read it, I realised I'd really got something that had never been told before, a completely new angle and a unique angle on these huge and familiar events. So yeah, it was a wonderful opportunity.
Noveler is the best way to write a novel. Why? quite simply because we've made it the easiest place to do it. Writing a novel is hard enough. Noveler takes care of all the logistical bits of writing a novel, just leaving that small matter of the words to you. It's a clean, beautiful writing interface with writing analytics, goals and streaks, advanced grammar checking, version control, day, evening, and night modes, and many other features designed to take all the stress out of writing. Tell us what you need and we'll build it. Together, we'll build a better tool. With a design-led approach, all the right tools that you need, Noveler saves all your words constantly, allows you to manage and order your novel easily. It's accessible from any device, desktop or mobile. It syncs to Google Drive and Dropbox. It allows exports in various formats, including ebook and more. It also has nice touches like allowing you to write both offline and online, unique for a web-based platform. Everyone needs help with their writing, from inspiration through to grammar checking, so we're doing our best to provide that support. We integrate that support directly into Noveler. Our advanced grammar checker powered by Pro Writing Aid does everything from spell check to style advice. Our writing courses include the incredible Tim Clare's Couch to ADK. We're really excited to offer all Author Stories listeners 30% off Noveler for a whole year. And it doesn't matter if you choose to sign up for the monthly or annual plan. You'll get 30% off. All you need to do is use the discount code HANK when you sign up. Noveler, Novlr. That's noveler.org.
So you stumble onto her biography, which of course is a really great primary source.
Yeah.
But as you started digging into the person of Marion Crawford, were there any other sources that you could find, and how much of a picture did you get to paint of who this historical figure was?
Well, there isn't much information about her. I mean, she's quite a remote figure to get hold of. I mean, there are lots of pictures of her, and she gives us her own account. And like, there were clues in the account. I mean, I looked for clues when I was reading The Little Princesses, and I used them and clues that I found about the world around her in the various historical sources that I read to build up her character and the royal world in which she unexpectedly found herself. But what I was always seeking to do when writing The Royal Governess was to always have this contrast between the young sparky woman with her woke ideas and this very traditional institution she entered. So there was always a kind of dynamic contrast there. I mean, I made her the beginning of the book quite I made her quite sort of feminist, quite almost left wing, and I thought that was not an unreasonable thing to do, because she was a young student at a time of great social and political upheaval, the 1920s and 1930s, and she was of a generation that could vote for the first time and train for a career. And as I say, she wanted to work in the slums and help close the gap between the haves and have-nots. So this all suggested a liberal mindset. So I just took that and just sort of expanded on it and gave her a succession of boyfriends that ranged from communists to unscrupulous journalists, which was fun. But I also wanted to show, I mean, the point of that was to show the contrasting worlds, I mean, her background and the world that she joined, but also how completely impossible it was to have a personal life while working for the royal family. And ultimately, she gave up the struggle. And by the time she left the royal family in 1949, it was too late to have her own children. And she married, quite late and quite badly to a husband who proved completely disastrous, because he was one of the people who encouraged her to publish her book. Which ended in this terrible ostracism. So yeah, it was So to cut to, I used what I could get hold of, but also filled in the gaps with my imagination.
The doses of normalcy that she insisted on bringing to the princesses, were there any references to that in the historical record of how she?
Yes, It's quite well known that she did that, and there were photographs of her doing it too. But it's really interesting, and quite funny. I mean, one of the things about writing about royalty, I mean, is the fact that it is quite a funny world sometimes. So, for example, the trip on the tube, which was great fun to fictionalize, because I could really see this when I was reading her account of it. I could really imagine what it was like. Princess Elizabeth had never been on an escalator before, so she couldn't believe it when the stairs started to move, and that was a sort of funny thing. But also, once they got on the tube train, the little princess, having seen her mother dealing with, members of the public at official events, thought that the way you interacted with ordinary people was that you sat and made all these sort of patronizing remarks to them. So she was sitting there saying, "Oh, so you're a char lady? How absolutely fascinating. And have you come far?" And this sort of little girl of about 6, having this conversation with this woman on the London Underground. And it was a complete nightmare for Crawford, because the whole point of the trip was that they were supposed to be undercover, that she wanted them to experience it as an ordinary person. And so for the princess to sit there having this very princessy conversation was a bit of a nightmare. And the other problem was the royal detective. They had this incredibly Clouseau-esque royal detective who just, drew attention to himself all the time and was really bumbling and sort of accident prone, and really dressed like a detective. So with a kind of an enormous mac on and a hat, and he just looked like a kind of cartoon of a detective, and everybody on the tube was staring at him and thinking, who is this man? What's he doing? And so basically, they all drew colossal amounts of attention to themselves. And so when they finally got to their destination, Crawford was just, so relieved, because she thought their cover was about to be blown and everybody had worked out what was happening. So it was quite funny. And so, she was very good at giving little sketches like that, all of which I took and fictionalized and lengthened for the novel. But yes, absolutely. It's all pretty well known that she did all this. Absolutely.
The 20th century saw many, many changes for the royal family, and a lot of changes in the way that the royal family and the idea of royalty was perceived by the general public. And Marion Crawford was a kind of a perfect personification of that, wasn't she? Of the change and the removal of the mystique, if you will, about the royals.
Yeah, it's a difficult trick to pull off, because I think, the Queen still manages to just tread this fine line. She's an absolute mystery to everybody, and yet she is seen as someone approachable, as someone people can identify with, and people see her as a woman of good sense and a stoical figure, a sort of constant in this sort of constantly changing and difficult world of the family. There are always so many problems, but she never seems to be affected by them. And there's a lot of criticism. Particularly in Britain, we have a love-hate relationship with the royal family. We reserve the right to criticize them, but we're fascinated by the glamour and the mystery. And yet the Queen is completely exempt from this criticism. She's so successful as a public figure, and the most famous person in the country, one of the most famous in the world. And so one of the questions I was asking myself when I started to write the Royal Governess is, what makes a person like this? Who are the influences on a person like this? And Marion Crawford was a crucial early influence, but hardly anyone's ever heard of her, which made her such an obvious subject for a novel for me. But the Queen is able, but I think taking her out into the world, showing her how normal people lived, has left its mark on the Queen. I think the Queen gets her air of good sense and people being able to identify with her from that early experience. And it's been really, really important and helped make her the monarch she is today. I think that's Crawford's legacy. That when people say that the Queen has good sense and she has the common touch, I think that's what Marion Crawford brought to her. And that's been a hugely important part of her success.
Absolutely. Wendy, when you have an idea like this and there's an historical figure that there is some public record about and you feel very confident that you can tell her story, how do you approach a writing project like this? And how do you look at the totality of someone's life and then find that certain window because that's what great historical fiction is not telling us the entire story of someone, but finding that window that we can look into her life and get the gist of what she was about and what her contributions were, and the struggles that she went through personally, because that's what we really want to know. We want to know how she fared through this as a human being like the rest of us. How do you locate that window that okay, this is the period of her life that I'm going to look at?
Well, I mean, in the case of Corfie, I followed her from the very beginning of her relationship with the royal family and until the end of it. I mean, it was that 17-year span that I was interested in, that I was following. But my approach, the window that I went in at, was I just was really appalled by how she'd been treated. I just thought it was incredibly unfair. And having read her book, read The Little Princesses, and seen how devoted to them she was, and how much she'd done for them, and all the adventures that they'd had together, the very close and loving relationship, and then this brutal ostracism, this brutal cutting off and exiling her. I thought it was really unfair, and I felt that she'd had a really rough ride, and I wanted to. Part of what drove me was thinking this is a story that people deserve to hear. It's a shame, she didn't deserve this. And her story is fantastic. It ranges from Edinburgh in the 1920s through the early years of the royal family as we know them now, the York family, the Duchess and Duke of York, their sort of intimate home life before they became the king and queen. And then once they become the king and queen, they all move to Buckingham Palace, and that's completely fascinating because Corfie takes us behind the scenes, and we see that it's not that glamorous. Buckingham Palace in those days was really falling apart. Corfie's bedroom curtains fell off the wall and nearly sort of brained her, nearly hit her on the head. And she went into the bathroom and saw an enormous mouse there on one occasion, and it was it's not what you expect at all. So everything I read about her just made me. She was sort of a sparky person with an interesting angle on things, and so she just appealed to me. I felt we had something in common. She was definitely an outsider who'd entered this very this I suppose really it's like a club. It's like the most mysterious club in the world that very few people get to enter, and even fewer get to come out and write about it. So it was those things really, the sort of the behind the scenes aspect I was fascinated by. But as I was just describing earlier, I think she probably did have a very difficult time romantically, because there weren't many opportunities to have a relationship. And when she'd started one in the Royal Governess, I have her starting several relationships with several men. And I think for a start, she was pretty bad with men in real life. But I mean, that was obviously great because I wanted her to have a sort of tumultuous love life, which could contrast with this wonderful home life of the royal family that she was helping to facilitate. But I wanted her to have a sort of, tumultuous love life. But I think she probably did. And it is impossible as a young woman to have a romantic life and work for the royal family. And I think this is the kind of thing that Meghan Markle has discovered. You can't be in and out at the same time. You've got to be one or the other. You can't have your ordinary life. You can't go outside the royal bubble and do what you like. You have to, once you're in it, you're in it, and you stay in it, and that's it. And it's a very tough thing for a young woman. So I wanted to show that. I felt that was very difficult for her. Difficult in a way that it wouldn't have been if she was joining as a footman or a butler or something, or she had to give up her life in a way that she hadn't expected and didn't really want. So there were all kinds of really strong emotional dramas going on that really appealed to me, that ran alongside the big historical events that she was involved in.
So there's a great scene during World War II where she takes her young charges down to the basement to hide from the bombing, and they're not far from where the royal jewels are hidden in a biscuit tin. Those little details like that. how do you go about uncovering those things and
Well, yeah.
to give us these interesting glimpses into what life was like?
It's so crazy, isn't it? The crown jewels and the biscuit, but that happened. That's a story that's only recently told the story. She was in there was a documentary a couple of years ago in which she described this happening, and I just thought, oh, that's really fun. I can put that in my story. But yeah, that was an amazing example of something that's completely unexpected. But it's interesting that you talk about the war, because one of the things I enjoyed most about dramatizing the war, which is obviously just a fantastically interesting period, so much happening, so many different angles to it, but I was able to bring in so many fantastic American characters, which I've really enjoyed. So for example, the Kennedy family, they're all there, they're all in, because Joe Kennedy was the ambassador to London in the 1930s. And we have a star appearance by Mrs. Roosevelt, a star appearance by General Eisenhower, and most dramatically of all, and frequently occurring, because I really enjoyed writing about her, is Willis Simpson, which I just felt that she was a really great character, and I wanted her to meet Marion and talk to Marion and advise her, and they could exchange views about the royal world in which they both found themselves. So, I had a lot of fun, but America has a very big part to play in this novel. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Great Americans are all over the Royal Governess.
And what a fantastic look into the life of this royal family, and that's had such an impact on all of us worldwide. The Royal Governess, a novel of Queen Elizabeth II's childhood, is out available everywhere now. We're going to put a link to it in the show notes. Wendy, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you do, where can they find you online?
Well, they can find me at wendyholden.net, and then they'll from wendyholden.net they will find my Twitter, my Facebook, my Instagram, all that stuff. So absolutely, I would love to hear from people. So please get in touch and let me know what you think of the Royal Governess. And Hank, can I just tell you, I've had such a great review in the Washington Post. How good is that?
That is amazing.
I'm so delighted. They say the Queen won't like it, but everybody else will. And it's a bestseller in the UK as well. So it's all going really well. So I really hope it does well in America and everybody enjoys it, because, as I say, it's jam-packed with fabulous Americans. And it's just a great story, which has never been told before from this angle. So I think it's going to be hopefully of interest anyway.
Absolutely. And what a fantastic read it is. Wendy, we're going to put links to all of those places where people can contact you in the show notes to make it easy for them, as well as a link where they can buy The Royal Governess. This has been so much fun chatting today. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hank. Thank you for having me.
Authors, I have a fantastic new service to tell you about. It's called PubSite. PubSite is a service to help you build your very own website, your home on the web, where you can promote your work and give your fans a place to connect with you. PubSite is a website platform that allows every author, regardless of budget, to have a great-looking professional website. Developed by the book marketing professionals at FSB Associates, PubSite is the new, easy-to-use DIY website builder developed specifically for books and authors. Whether you're an author of one book or 20, or a small publisher, PubSite allows you to build, design, and most importantly, update your website pain-free. No need to be dependent on a designer or webmaster to make a small but costly change to your website. Save the money and do it yourself. PubSite is the best platform for authors because it's a book-centric platform. PubSite was built just for authors and small publishers. Every design, feature, and layout is book-centric. They have customized designs for you to use. It's easy to build. No coding or HTML is necessary to create a stunning, professional-looking website with all the features you want. Get a custom domain name, yourname.com. It's simple to update. You can add all of your books, add a blog and a book tour, sell from any retailer, manage your email list and social media, and even do e-commerce. Build your website with a 14-day free trial, then pay just $19.99 per month, which includes hosting. And we offer packages starting at $499 to set up the website for you. pub-site.com. the place to help authors find their home on the web.